For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Asian markets more or less up. What's going on today is the FOMC meeting minutes, which we'll get tonight, and we'll give some idea of the mindset of the Fed, and generally speaking, interest rates and CPI figures again from the United States. So all in all, a bundle of things for investors to look forward to. They seem to be taking it on the chin, and the majority of the markets in Asia Pacific are up. Now, here's quite an important one. This is China. It's released its rules for AI because of ChatGPT, which is a United States-based company. A couple of Alibaba and Baidu have decided that they're going to enter this territory, which they've been doing for some time. But the Chinese rules for artificial intelligence state that they should reflect the core values of socialism, and they should not undermine state power. Now, again, I don't know where you are on the political spectrum about all this, but I would say that doesn't say intelligence to me. That says rule making. I'll have my own thoughts about whether I think socialism is a good idea. Thank you very much. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But that's just a private thing. It doesn't say intelligence. That says rules to me. Anyway, okay. The IMF meeting with the World Bank in Washington as we speak has once again downgraded the global growth to 3%. That's the weakest since 1990. They've got a new chief economist there, Pierre-Olivier Gorincas, and he is saying that this, and of course, all this assumes that the banking crisis is put to bed and doesn't rear its head again, but the IMF downgrading global growth. Indonesia, Jakarta, has had a very, very successful IPO. This is a company called Harita Nickel, and it's actually being traded now above its IPO price. This ties in very nicely, thank you very much, with Jakarta wishing to control the manufacture of electric vehicles right from original through the supply chain to the finished product. That helps them. As far as the United States is concerned, well, as you'd expect, stock futures relatively flat today. This is because of all the reasons I've just been talking about. We're going to get the FOMC minutes. We'll hear more about the Fed. We'll hear more about interest rates and so on. And nobody's really moving right now. A slight increase in shares in equities yesterday. Boeing. Now, again, here's a silver lining. Don't get too depressed with what the IMF's saying about growth in the rest of the world, because Boeing is recording its highest deliveries since December. The importance of that being that airlines and buying jets tends to be quite a good forward indicator of where people think economies are going. And there is no question that with these 40 jets, which have actually been delivered, it's likely that, 64 planes delivered, 64, not 40, 64 planes delivered. It's likely that airlines and thus travel picking up and thus tourists picking up. And for all sorts of reasons, that's good news for economies which depend on that business. HSBC, you remember it bought the UK arm of SVB Bank for £1. It started recruiting investment bankers from SVB, basically to underline its position in the United States, which is actually quite an interesting way in which it's to go. By contrast, Deutsche Bank is finally pulling out of Russia. They've issued 500 tech workers. They've had their severance pay, and Deutsche Bank is getting out of Russia. CBI, now that there have been, these are allegations of sexual misconduct. It's lost its director general. It's got a new one called Rain Newton-Smith, and she's got quite a big job as far as the CBI is concerned. This is, in effect, that the boss's organisation, medium-sized and also large companies too. It did have the era of government. I suspect that what we're seeing here is an existential change to the CBI and how it actually operates. Joe Biden landed in Northern Ireland last night. As you know, he's meeting the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, this morning. What he's going to do is he said that his main task is to what he describes as keep the peace. It's likely that his presence there may start the stalled logjam political process in the province. He does have his own trade envoy, Joe Kennedy III, who's also with him, and he will spend longer in the Republic of Ireland. This chimes very well with what happens in the United States. He does actually have Irish ancestry. A lot of people don't in the United States, but they still feel a strong affiliation for what's going on. So this will play quite well for him at home. The IMF, again, taking its attention to the UK economy. It says that growth will make it one of the worst economies in the world. The economy will shrink by 0.3%, it thinks, in 2023. That's slightly better than its original forecast, which is the economy shrinking by 0.6% in 2023. But it's still a fairly depressing note from them. And it just so happens that the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has appointed a top Morgan Stanley banker to act as his business advisor. He's called Franck Petitgat, and he is French-born. He holds a Légion d'honneur. He worked for 30 years at Morgan Stanley. He's recognised as being quite a good figure, and he's tasked with getting the UK back on track by the end of 2023. And two really small bits of commodity news. Oil, it's holding on to its gains as it's steady demand, no absolute risk as far as that's concerned. Still, China is beginning to underwhelm the oil market. As far as gold's concerned, the demand rate is relatively high. People are still fearing risk, and we'll see if there is more banking stress, then people will start to go to gold. So we're looking at that sort of $2,000, maybe $2,050 an ounce price for gold as we speak. That's the global view this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for giving us the global view this morning. I'd like to go to the UK with regards to IMF's predictions that the UK, despite good news that it's not set for an immediate recession, is still going to be the worst performing major economy in the world this year for 2023, as you've mentioned, for
the G7.
In the G7, yes, so one of the major economies. So, as you mentioned, 0.3% contraction. However, another aspect to this is that whilst Jeremy Hunt is quite optimistic, looking at the more positive side of it, the Labour Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has said that this is evident of the poor management of the economy by the Tories. I know you've talked about Rishi Sunak bringing in a special advisor, experience in that area, but they're still saying that they have badly managed the economy. They can talk about COVID, look at the war in Ukraine and Russia, but what's your view on this? Do you think it's time for the Tory to accept defeat, that they haven't been able to manage the UK economy as they ought, or do you think perhaps there are other factors that is responsible for this abysmal growth? And then going on to the interview with Elon Musk, BBC interview with Elon Musk on Twitter Spaces earlier today, they had reports around that, and what it mentioned was that heading Twitter is highly painful and has been a roller coaster for him. He also spoke to the BBC being tagged as a state-owned media outfit. I'd like to get your view on those two things, please.
Okay, first of all, you've been quoting two politicians there, Rachel Reeves and also Jeremy Hunt, and I listen to what they say with the usual pinch of salt, because they are politicians. Of course they say those kind of things. It's Labour's job to attack the Tory government, and it's the Tory government's job to say, we're doing all right, thank you very much indeed. So, I mean, what do you say? All I can say is, I quoted the Boeing figure. I think the Boeing thing is very interesting. I know it doesn't have anything directly to do with the UK, but if we're seeing a world which is not viewed through the rear view mirror of the IMF, which is what they tend to do. And remember, they have number one, they have improved their forecast And number two, it is likely that the UK will avoid a recession. It's not positive, but it's likely. So all this is basically politician, toing and froing. Basically, I think it means anything at all. I think people are struggling with the high cost of living, but the rest of it is all technicalities. I think the hiring of the business advisor is very significant indeed, because this guy's had 30 years at Morgan Stanley, and whatever you think about Morgan Stanley, and he's French born as well, so he presumably brings some kind of experience to the UK, which has not had an enormously, or the government at least, has not had an enormously helpful relationship with business. Maybe this will change things round. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. As far as Elon Musk's concerned, you ain't seen nothing yet. He thinks it's tough now. Just wait until the regulators around the world start to really tackle what social media is about. I bet you he thinks it's difficult, and I bet you he said apparently in that interview with the BBC, which incidentally is state funded. I pay a television license. I have no say in that whatsoever. I don't know what they're complaining about. Least said, probably easiest mended, I would say, as that's concerned. As far as Musk's concerned, yes, of course it's a difficult job. That's what you bought into. Social media is now getting quite grown up, and what was thought to be the sort of swapping of ideas turns out to be like scrapping in the school playground. You're welcome to it. I mean, and Elon Musk is welcome to Twitter. Business model yet so far, Mr. Musk? Not a lot.
Okay, Michael, two things. Yesterday I was asking you about generative AI, artificial intelligence, whether a day will come when, artificial intelligence will be providing media content and you will have television presenters who are AI generated. Well, it happens that has been done in Kuwait, where they now have on Kuwait News, an AI robotic news presenter called Fedha. So maybe in the future, you and I will no longer be doing this. We'll have, some other persons from the AI background doing it. But the cyberspace, administration agency, the commission rather, CAC of China. Well, some of the things that they are saying is that one, you can't use artificial intelligence to promote not just the socialism you talked about that should be the core value. Discrimination, bigotry, false information, or to use it, in any negative way. It looks like control, but I think that, with the way there's a competition now for artificial intelligence to generate content and images, maybe perhaps that kind of regulation will be necessary. After all, Italy in March raised concerns about privacy concerns and banned Chat GPT. Maybe more countries will go in that direction. Now, as for President Biden's visit to the UK, well, I mean, the big issue here, he will be meeting today with the 5 political parties in Northern Ireland, apart from the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and also visit to distant relatives and all of that. But the big issue here is about the Windsor framework, the Windsor framework, and the Stormont break. The Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, for purposes of sovereignty and having a good space within the UK market, they're still kicking. Their first minister left the parliament. Now, do you think that President Biden will be able to broker peace, or the UK will still have to go back to the EU and further renegotiate the Stormont break or that post-Brexit deal on preventing a hard border in Northern Ireland?
No, I think the agreement, the Windsor Agreement, is more or less set it out. I think anybody will going back on that. And there was quite a considerable charm offensive for Ursula von der Leyen, who came across, as you remember. She supported that, met the Prime Minister, and they all thought it was absolutely fine. And that really is the first stage. Will Biden do something? I mean, maybe he will. Maybe he's the kind of person that the Irish, and I mean the Irish, not the Northern Irish, but the Irish Irish actually wish to speak to? Will he push it forward? He may speak to the DUP and say, okay, you've had your say, now why don't you just get on with the power sharing? He might well say that to them. I don't know. What is he offering? This is the point, isn't it? Not so much they all understand. They've seen these politicians before. They've seen many politicians before. Not all of them very good politicians either. But the real olive branch to Northern Ireland and to Ireland is the gentleman I mentioned, who is a part of the Kennedy family, Joe Kennedy III, who is going along as trade envoy. Now, if you start talking about trade and you start talking about jobs and you start talking about investment and you start talking about money, then that's all very different indeed. So you can have wishy-washy kind of stuff about whether Biden will actually do something or not. But if he's taking something there, which I suspect he probably is, else he wouldn't be going there, I think he's probably taking something a quite big carrot for the Northern Irish and the Irish to grab hold of. So no, I do not think that so far the Windsor Agreement will be changed. That is as it is. It's now down to the local people to get on with it. As far as AI is concerned, I mean, yeah, good luck with that then. I mean, I have rules about what I am prepared to say, and I'm sure you have rules as well. What I said to you was I didn't like the fact that the Chinese rules, and again, my Mandarin is not up to much, but I think the translation of it is that AI should be reflecting the core values of socialism, and it should never undermine the state power. Now, what does that suggest to you? Does that suggest some form of censorship? Because that's what it suggests to me. It doesn't suggest intelligence to me. It's not somebody looking at two alternatives and making a value judgment about them. It says, do not do this. I don't react very well to that. Do you? I mean, you use your intelligence to approach the news agenda as it happens every day, and this is our job. I don't wish to be governed by rules that says I may not do this.
Oh, wow. Okay. I see your concern about censorship. Well, thank you very much, Michael. Now, for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Odiri joins us now. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. It's all about the IMF and the ongoing IMF World Bank spring meetings, particularly their outlook for the global economy, of which, of course, the sub-Saharan Africa is very much a part of that. This is their report that they put out, a rocky recovery, which tells you all you need to know about how they see things unfolding. The recovery is going to be patchy. And particularly, they talked about inflationary pressures for not just African nations, but pretty much around the world. If we take a look at, there's a chart here where they're looking at anchored inflation expectations down the line. Your blue bar is your pre-pandemic survey for inflation expectations, and then your red is their latest survey. The last survey in blue was 2019, the in red was 2023. You can see that you still have your latest survey being as close to the pre-pandemic levels as far as their forecast for inflation. So at the bottom of your screen to the left, the lowest one, and this is how unfair life is, your AEs are your advanced economies. So you've got your United States, your Eurozone, and so on. In the middle, you've got your EMMIEs, which is your emerging market and middle income economies. So you've got your China, your Brazil, your Turkey, and so on and so forth. And then to the right, the one with the highest level of inflation expectations as far as going forward is your LIDCs, your low income development countries, where your Nigeria, your Ghanas, and so on fall in. And you can see there that the LIDCs, the low income nations, are the ones that have the highest forecast for inflation going forward, which is incredibly unfair because, well, it's unfair, but it's a reality. They are the poorest nations. They are import dependent on the advanced, the AEs to the left of your screen. They are importing their inflation. Their currencies are weak and they're just getting beaten down. They've got high debt and everything else. So things are just, worse as far as inflation expectations are concerned. So that now brings us to the IMF, and the IMF encouraging the Central Bank of Nigeria to continue its monetary policy tightening. So they want the central banks, for as far as low-income development countries are concerned, they want them to continue to hiking rates to try to contain inflation. But this is where a number of people differ, and I'm in that camp as well. Is monetary policy tightening, is it working? It is not, and I've used this next chart, these food supply shocks. I've used this again and again and again. Or rather, sorry, let me get to the IMF growth projections. So for sub-Saharan Africa, they're looking at 3.6% 2023, 2024 4.2%. So the recovery is on there. Nigeria 3.2% 2023, 2024 3%. So they're seeing a slowdown for us. If you remember, we grew at 3.01% in 2022. We grew at 3.4% coming out of the pandemic in 2021. Look at South Africa. Because of the ESCOM challenges, 2023 they're looking at 0.1%. 2024 1.8% for South Africa. So those projections, the inflation very much is part and parcel of those economic projections that the IMF is making. So they're saying that Nigeria should continue to tighten monetary policy. That is, continue to hike rates to tame inflation. But the food supply shocks, if we continue to look at the reason why food supply, why we have continued high inflation for food, it is because of these same reasons that the governor of the central bank mentioned at the last monetary policy meeting. Increase in road transportation costs, security issues in food producing areas. We talked about Benue a couple days ago, legacy infrastructure challenges. What on this list can monetary policy fix? The fiscal side has to do something, right? Here's Daniel Lay. He's head of research at the IMF. So here's part of what he said with respect to Nigeria. It says for Nigeria, our forecast is one of the most stable for this year. For 2023, it's the same as 3.2 and then 3% in 2024. Then he talked about the inflationary pressure, where the IMF is forecasting double-digit inflation to be maintained in Nigeria for 2023. So this is an economy with he didn't just say high, he said very high inflation as well. And this is why we have a forecast of about 20% inflation for 2023. Think about that. February was 21.9 or so. And you're looking at a forecast for the rest of the year. Then this is where he gets to recommendations. He says, one of our main recommendations is to tighten monetary policy. That is, continue to raise rates to ensure that this inflation comes down towards the more target levels. But as we saw with the food supply shock issues, monetary policy is limited in terms of what it can do because of the context of our own issues. So that's something for the new team, that incoming governments to take care of. And speaking of the new team, there was a sighting as part of the Nigerian delegation at the ongoing IMF spring meeting. Mr. Olawale Edu, he was spotted, and this picture, I mean, he's commanding the audience of that's Shubham Chaudhuri, World Bank Country Director for the World Bank Country Director for Nigeria, and he's there, explaining whatever it is. Now, this gentleman here has pretty much high pedigree. If we can take a look at his profile here. So, Masters in Economics from the University of Sussex, Brighton, UK. Bachelors in Economics, University of London, Queen's Mary College. Former Finance Commissioner, Lagos State under the Tinubu administration when Tinubu was governor. He's a non-executive chair, Chapel Hill Denham Group, which is an investment bank. He has worked with the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation. He's got, economics, merchant banking, corporate finance, international finance. So he is being tipped, the word on the street. I mean, he's been nominated to be part of the president-elect's transition team. But the word on the street is that he just might be our next coordinating finance minister for the economy. So very interesting. And this is, of course, feeds into Bola Ahmed Tinubu being known for putting together some real heavy hitters, right? The teams that he put. So, that picture is strong picture right there.
You started with the spring meeting of the IMF World Bank in Washington, D.C. Well, there's so much coming out of that meeting.
I know.
And the forecasts are so many.
Yeah.
And you have this country forecast, for the G20 countries, for the G7 countries. We're told that for the developed world, there's likely to be a situation whereby inflation goes back to pre-COVID levels.
Yeah.
And except in the UK, where the UK economy is likely to shrink by 0.3%, which will be the worst in the G7 countries, followed then by Germany, where a steady decline is predicted. Then if you place that against predictions in India, they say India is going to do well. You go to Pakistan, the forecast is different. So these forecasts are so many. But the one that concerns us is Africa, where they say that, look, growth is not likely to be more than 3.2% on the average. And that for Nigeria, 3.2 this year, 3.4, in 2024. But the recommendation in the World Economic Outlook, WEO as it is called, that the Nigerian, central bank should, focus more on tightening monetary policy. Well, in the last 1 year, the Central Bank of Nigeria has tightened monetary policy 6 times.
Exactly.
With inflation as at end of end of March?
February.
End of February,
yeah,
at 21.91%.
Exactly.
Right? We keep tightening. The MPR at the last meeting was raised to 18%.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, but then you still have this problem of other distortions within the economy. So I agree with you that, one, maybe this monetary policy, tightening monetary policy, maybe it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. As you have seen in the example of Japan, which has a different approach, as you have seen in the example of Turkey, which has a different example. One of the questions we have raised here is, who determines that mythical 2%, which was even a rule of the thumb that was adopted at a particular time. And I also agree with you that we have to look at the fiscal side. Part of the problem we have in Nigeria is this misalignment between monetary policy and fiscal policy, which has now put the Central Bank of Nigeria over the years in a situation whereby the Central Bank has to carry the additional burden of handling monetary policy and also looking at fiscal policy. As for Mr. Wale Edun, well, he's a highly respected person, one of those brilliant persons in the Bola Tinubu team. He was headhunted, I guess, to be part of the Tinubu administration, and he distinguished himself. In fact, at a point, the story was that he was the one that, Governor Tinubu, as he was then, wanted as his successor, but he declined. But as a banker, Stanbic IBTC, Chase Bank in New York, and all these banks, then his own Chapel Hill, Denham, offering financial advisory services. He's a man that is highly respected. But I guess it's at this World Bank spring meeting because it's familiar territory for him.
Right?
In any case, that's his field as a professional. But what is even more important is the fact that he's in the president-elect's transition team. So he and Governor Atiku Bagudu, they are in that transition team, and it's part of, I guess, the preparation for May 29 that he has to be at this strategic meeting, because by the time you have the next spring meeting, the Tinubu government will already be in place, and this will be preparatory to engaging with the rest of the world. So don't be surprised that he's commanding attention because he knows the subject. He's an expert.
He does.
As to whether he will be Minister of Finance or CBN governor, well, all of you are speculating. You are already distributing positions. That should be up to the president-elect.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to draw off before I move on to the fiscal policy side that Dr. Bati had mentioned, and I do agree with you, because we have tightened monetary policy, and perhaps maybe the Nigerian economy is a peculiar case in terms of defining certain economic policies or realities that have worked in other countries, and perhaps we should start to look inwards. But other two things, when you look at inflation and monetarism that you must look at, beyond monetary policy, is obviously, as Dr. mentioned, fiscal policy, but also to reduce the creation of money by CBN. And when looking at that, then you must also have conversations around ways and means.
Indeed.
And this is why we talked about it a number of times, that how is this going to be funded? Are they going to produce more money? How is that going to be controlled? So when we look at inflation rising in Nigeria, and the 20%, I feel it's quite conservative, at 21.9% currently. 20% is quite optimistic at best. In terms of the peculiar nature of our own economic situation in Nigeria, I think there are other things that have to be done. One of which has been is also reducing budget deficits, which the last budget hasn't been able to successfully do. So when we look at things like that, I am not very optimistic about 20% being projected as our inflation rate for 2023.
Gotcha.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you.